Hey guys, welcome to our first set of notes here for chapter 12. We're going to go through meiosis in this chapter. We just did mitosis, and so it's a real smooth transition from mitosis into meiosis. And we're going to talk about sexual reproduction and a little bit of the costs and the benefits involved in that. So let's get into it. Your book starts with the question, why sex? Which is something that a few of you guys asked me in class. I kind of thought that was funny. Why sex? Well, asexual reproduction is certainly a route you can go. If you're a pretty simple animal, you can do that. And you're going to get a genetically identical copy of the parent. And so asexual reproduction makes more individuals, which is great, but they're more individuals that have the same genes as the parent. And in some cases, that's not necessarily great. You want as much genetic diversity as you can if you're going to survive, viruses, bacteria, changing environment, that kind of stuff. It's a good thing to be diverse. And so what you get when you go through sexual reproduction is you get offspring that are unique because they inherit their genes from both of their parents. You are a unique mixture of your mom and dad's genetic material, and they are a unique mixture of your granddad's and your grandma's genetic material. And your mixture of genetic material, if you have a sister or brother, is different from your siblings, unless you happen to be a monozygotic twin, in which case it could be largely exactly the same. So sexual reproduction gives us a little more variety there. An adaptive trait can spread more quickly through sexual reproduction. If a member of a certain species is able to, produce bigger antlers than everybody else, he's got a little better chance of surviving, then he's going to spread that trait to his offspring. His offspring are going to have that trait and spread it to their offspring. And so a beneficial trait has the ability to spread through a population and benefit the population as a whole, or at least that's the idea. So collectively, our offspring of our sexual reproducers, they're going to have a better chance of survival if a harmful mutation arises in a population, because the individual that has that harmful mutation will very likely die before they're able to reproduce, and that mutation won't be passed on. And so the idea is that as a whole, we're going to benefit from this diversity and this mixing of genetic material that you get with sexual reproduction. And so here's an example of a couple of these. These are mud snails. They have the ability to reproduce asexually if they want to, or they can choose to produce sexually as well. And so here we have an example in plant world, a little bit different. This is a pollen grain here in orange. This is the stigma of a plant, the flower, the female organ of the flower, and that pollen grain is germinating on that flower. And so we have plants undergoing sexual reproduction. We have animals undergoing sexual reproduction. And so it is generally viewed as worth the effort. So we can't talk about sexual reproduction without talking about meiosis. Sexual reproduction gives us these unique combinations in traits in fewer generations than does asexual reproduction. You can still get a little bit of variety with asexual reproduction. Even though you're making clones, you still stand the chance that those same genes might be expressed differently and give you a different trait in the end, which is why even identical twins who have the same genetic material, they might talk a little differently, or they might make decisions differently, or they might be good at different things. Your genes don't determine every single thing about you. Far from it, I would argue. But you can get that variety with asexual reproduction. It just takes a lot longer. So the process inherent to sexual reproduction that gives rise to the variation is meiosis. And this is just a wonderful way to get a lot of variety. And the nuclear division that meiosis is halves the chromosome number. And so we start with 23 pairs, if we're talking humans here. So we start with 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs. When we're done with meiosis, we're going to have 4 cells that have half that genetic complement. So 23 chromosomes total, not 23 pairs anymore. And so we have somatic cells, which are our regular old body cells. And those things are generally going to be diploid. I'm afraid of the word always, but I almost want to say always diploid, which is the same thing as saying two 2N. Pardon the sloppy handwriting. So 2N is a diploid cell, and that's going to make up skin and heart and hair and, all that liver, all that kind of stuff. 2N, right? One chromosome of each pair is maternal, the other is paternal. So you got one chromosome from mom, one chromosome from dad. You got a copy of chromosome 2 from mom, you got a copy of chromosome 2 from dad. That goes on and on and on to 22. When we get to 23, we have non-identical sex chromosomes. If you're a guy, you probably have one X chromosome and one Y chromosome. If you're a girl, you probably have two X chromosomes. It's not necessarily always the case, but generally that's the case. Homologous chromosomes are going to carry the same set of genes, so that's kind of cool. You're going to get, mom's set of genes for your hair color, and you're going to get dad's set of genes for hair color, and that plus your environment's going to give you your hair color. Same for eyes. Same for blood type. That's all that kind of stuff comes from the same genes on homologous chromosomes. So when it comes to genes and their alleles, over time we can get unique mutations accumulating in these separate lines of descent. So some of these mutations can occur in the genes. Alleles are different forms of the same gene. If you know one thing from this slide, make it this. Alleles are different forms of the same gene. I know my mom's blood type, I know my dad's blood type, and I know that I carry A positive blood, and that my alleles are big A and little I. So I have two different forms of a gene, and even though what's expressed in me when I go to give blood is A, I know that I could donate to my children the A allele for blood type. Or I could donate the recessive I allele for blood type. And so it's the same information. The gene still codes for the surface proteins on my blood, but I have two forms of it. And I can only donate one of those forms to a cell that's undergone meiosis. And so having different forms of the same gene is very, very important in genetics, and it's very important in biology because you can carry a trait and not express it. And it can be expressed in your kids. And that's a really, really cool idea. So these differences can influence the traits shared by a species. Offspring of the sexual reproducers of the world are going to inherit a brand new combination of alleles. Different from mom, different from dad, different from their siblings. Truly and honestly unique. And that is the basis of their traits. And so that's why alleles are so very important. So here's your genes on a chromosome. They've kind of mapped them out, which is really cool. Corresponding color patches indicate corresponding DNA sequences. So in our homologous chromosome pair, these chromosomes carry the same sets of genes. So here's the homologous pair. One chromosome, one chromosome. Here's the section of a gene that codes for a certain product. Here's that same section of a gene in the homologous chromosome. Blue, blue, red, red. It's the same area. We call that a locus. L-O-C-U-S. A locus is a location on a chromosome where a certain gene or trait is carried. And so they occur in pairs. They're the same information. I shouldn't say that. Shoot. Let's not say the same information. Very similar information in the same location on homologous chromosomes. So let's talk about gametes. Sexual reproduction involves the fusion of reproductive cells. These guys are called gametes, okay? So think sperm and egg, those are gametes. Pollen from a tree, an ova in a plant, and a flower, those are gametes, okay? And those come from two different parents. And in plants and animals, these gametes are going to form inside some special reproductive structures or special organs. For example, anthers of a flower produce pollen. Okay? The division of these immature reproductive cells gives rise to gametes. So germ cells are cells that have the potential to become gametes, but haven't yet. As they grow and divide and differentiate, they eventually become gametes. So pollen grains that can fertilize a flower, or sperm that have the ability to be transported and to swim. That kind of stuff, right? All right, so here's some animal reproductive organs. We have the testis in the male, or the testes in the male, and the ovary in the female. Of course, the testes make sperm. That's the male gamete. The ovaries make eggs. That's the female gamete. All right, easy peasy. Let's take a look at a plant. Here we have the anther. It is going to produce the pollen. Here we have the ovary. It is going to produce the ovum, or the egg. And now this might not necessarily occur, but if this plant is self-fertile, then sexual reproduction can be incredibly easy. It can take pollen from its own anther onto stigma, style, ovary, it's quite a trip, and then into ovum and fertilize this and turn this into a seed. Not all plants are necessarily self-fertile, and this flower may not be, but that's an example of a way that this flower could essentially kind of cheat the system and sexually reproduce with itself. It's called selfing. And if it does that, it gets the benefit of meiosis without the risk of not finding a mate. So diversity without the trouble of actually finding a mate for sexual reproduction is to undergo sexual reproduction with yourself. Not all organisms can do it, but for those who can, it's kind of a cool trick. So meiosis is going to halve your chromosome number. In an animal, this germ cell can give rise to eggs or to sperm, like we've already mentioned. These guys have a single set of chromosomes, and so they have transitioned from diploid cells, oops, sorry about that, there we go, into haploid cells. So I wrote earlier in this PowerPoint about 2N diploid cells for skin and liver and hair and stuff like that, and now we're talking gametes, sperm and egg and pollen, haploid 1N. So their chromosome is half of the diploid number, and meiosis, of course, of the human germ cell 2N would produce gametes with 23 chromosomes, which is N. So we're going to stop there. I don't want to make this video run on too long, and we will jump back into meiosis next time. So thanks for your time, guys.